Hi, my name's Kim. I'm a licensed and nationally certified East Asian medical provider and a Taoist practitioner. I'm going to spend a little bit of time today talking about wuxing, or 5 elements, as it relates to the different generations. If you can see all the smoke, I have my incense burning this morning to clear out the energy. So hopefully that will bring some good vibes into this episode. Wuxing, or 5 elements, is a way to better understand what each generation is bringing to the world, what their underlying core benefit is for the world, and then I'll talk a little bit about what happens when it's out of balance and how that can affect the world also. And what these 5 elements did is they identified energies through the circle of life. So you have the 5 elements, which is fire, earth, metal, water, wood. Those are the 5 elements. And then if you look at it from a life perspective, wood is for spring, and that's when things rise up and grow and do their most growth and their most expansion. You have summer, where they start to bear fruit. You have fall, where you harvest and you look back at everything that you've accomplished and you start to reap what you've sowed. There you go. Okay, reap what you sowed. And then you have winter, where things fall asleep or they pass away, they die, and they go into a dormant period where they rest and rejuvenate, and then they come forward again in spring. And if we look at that as just a day cycle, in the morning we wake up, in the afternoon we reach our peak energy. As evening comes, we start to get tired, we begin to rest, we begin to look back at the day, and then we start seeing we go to sleep. In winter or at night, we go to sleep and we rejuvenate so that we can wake up again at the beginning of the day. So that's the circle of life. And each aspect of the circle of life is important to our whole being. We have to go through that circle in order to be the healthiest person that we can be. And in the same way, the world, the earth, our generations do the same thing. I had started looking at the generations and their underlying element that was driving their generation maybe about 6 years ago, because it was interesting to me. You know, as I talk on this channel, we're going through this huge change. This decade's going to be a bit of a nightmare because this is the summer of the change. So this is the most young this change will ever be. So it's going to be the most energy expended on this change from both sides, from the sides that don't want to change and from the sides that are changing. So this whole change dynamics that was impacting our whole world had me curious. How is that impacting our generations? So let's start with like the boomer generation. That is actually a fire generation. So a fire generation, and you'll see the alpha generation is going to be the next fire generation. The fire generation is the visionaries. They're the ones who are going to be able to see a different path. And they're the ones that are going to be able to take us into a new direction. And then when you look at it on the less positive side, they can be super controlling, they can be overbearing, and they can be very selfish. So that's on the negative side. And after that, there was a earth generation that it just really wasn't even recognized in our world. It's the end of the boomers, the beginning of Gen X. There was this Earth generation, and they didn't fit into the boomer generation, and they didn't fit into the Gen X generation. They were supposed to be a stabilizing force. So whatever the visionaries brought forward, they were supposed to take that vision and stabilize that. And I'm part of that generation. And I've always felt that that generation doesn't have a voice. You didn't see them in politics. You didn't see them anywhere. And if they did step up in corporate America, they would, there were so many of the boomers that they would get pushed back down, and they would get pushed into whatever direction corporate America was going. So they never really had a voice. And I had really kind of resigned myself that my generation, this lost generation that's not even acknowledged in the world, I had kind of thought that they were going to have no say. So the positive thing about that generation is they're supposed to be a stabilizing force. And the negative aspects of that is that they can become I guess a little bit too detailed oriented, almost administrative. We kind of get upset with government at times because we think that they're getting into too many details. That's when this generation's off. That's what you can see in us, is that we would get a little bit about crossing our T's and dotting our I's, making sure that everything's in place and correct. So that can get exasperating too. After that, you had this metal generation, and the metal generation, they're like the process engineers. What the fire generation envisioned, the earth generation brought into fruition and implemented it. And then here we have this wonderful metal generation, and what they do is they do all this process improvement on it. And one of the areas where you can see the metal generation is technology. They're really good with technology. They're really good with playing with technology, finding new solutions. They're really good with science. So this generation, this metal generation, is really great about taking what's been implemented and making it so much better, taking it to that next level. And then when that metal generation, which is Gen X, is out of balance, you will see this love of money that they will ignore everything else. Money becomes so much more important. Every penny that they can amass and hoard in their little bag of gold is so important to them, and they really don't care what that does to anybody else. And you can see that in our private equity firms. Oh my gosh, they take that to a whole new level. And then you can see that in some of our large technology corporations today. Just this insane love of money at the expense of everybody else. Okay, so after metal comes the water generation, which is the millennials. And this is a really neat generation. They're a real quiet generation. You notice how they're not about to push their agenda. They're very patient and very accepting, tolerant, not accepting, very tolerant of other things around them. but they're also one of the biggest nurturing generations. So they're, I see them as so incredibly important on what's happening with our younger generations, because they are like the best people for nurturing children. And why I say that is, I don't know, did you guys watch the Olympics? For me, that was like the best Olympics ever. And why it was is because I saw so many of this Gen Z in those Olympics, and just how they dealt with adversity and with competition and with each other. It was so incredibly positive, and just their acceptance of diversity and their acceptance of failure when they made a mistake. They accepted the fact that people make mistakes, and even though it might have been heart-wrenching, they handled it. And you don't see that happening too much today. You'll see people make a mistake and they get defensive and attack everybody. It's so horrible. So what I liked about this millennial generation is, like, they are the most patient, the most nurturing, the most caring generation out there. And they're bringing up this new generation of Gen Z and the Alpha generation. And that nurturing, what they did is they brought forward children that were very solid in the earth element. So they were very solid in who they were. They were comfortable and accepting of themselves and others. That's not something you see in the older generations. Most of the older generations are very deficient in the earth element, and that earth element is what brings stability to our personality. It's what gives us the ability to deal with adversity without making it personal. So here you have this millennial generation, because of their helicopter parenting and their nurturing, and they're constantly being there and supporting these kids. They gave these kids this really solid sense of who they are. And you can see that when you watch people like Simone Biles, who had to stand up for herself against the whole world. And that, for me, was a really amazing moment. That is not something anybody in my generation would have done, because we would have been massacred by the boomers. There's just no way we would have had the strength to do that. This Gen Z, because they have such a strong sense of self, they can stand up for themselves and withstand these incredible hurricanes that might come their way. And that is because of you, the millennials. So all that nurturing, super helpful in helping people identify who they are and be really solid in that foundation. Okay, so that's the water generation. And then after that, this is the generation that, if you watch the channel, I'm really excited about. It's the Gen Z. It's the wood generation. And why I'm excited about this wood generation is partly because they are so sure of who they are. And I find in clinic, when I'm dealing with them, that it's really fun. They will deal with you as an adult. I find myself talking to them, and I will be talking to them as an adult that's my age, and they understand the nuances of that conversation, and they're very astute on the nuances of people. And they're much more empathetic and accepting of people. So, but why do I like the wood generation? So the wood generation, that's that spring element. That's that element that's going to go reach out, and it's going to create something new, and it's going to have all this energy to do that. That's what I like about this wood generation, is they are going to recreate the world. And every time we go through a cycle of change, that cycle of change, part of it is recreation, becoming something new. So this is a normal movement, and they're going to bring in a whole cycle of change. And because they are so solid in themselves, and they understand who they are, and they have such a strong foundation of what they think is right and wrong, that generation will be able to withstand the hurricane that we're facing right now, as we are entering, well, we're in the midst of this enormous change that's going on right now. So this wood generation is going to bring about this huge change into the world. And, well, you know what? I didn't tell you what happens with the millennial generation when they're out of balance. When they're out of balance, they are going to avoid things. You'll see that they will not only avoid things, is they will disconnect. So if something is causing them to go out of balance, and you'll see this at work a lot, that they will disconnect and they'll leave the job, or you won't see them again. And that's because whatever's happening there in that environment is causing them so much stress that they just have to take a break from it. Almost that mental health thing. Let's go back to Gen Z, because this is my favorite generation. So Gen Z. So when they're in balance, they are going to fight for new change. They're going to bring forward new ideas, new ways of doing things, and they're going to be very comfortable doing that, and they will be very supportive of that. And when they're in balance, they will do that with a tremendous amount of empathy and kindness. When they're out of balance, they become the tyrant and the dictator, and aggression. The revolution in China, the communist revolution in China, that was out of balance. And that, you saw, that was pretty hideous. So when this generation is out of balance, that's the kind of change that they can bring in. I'm not seeing this generation out of balance like that. I am seeing this generation has a lot of empathy. I am seeing a lot of exasperation with some of the incredible entitled and selfish actions that fire generation does and continues to do just relentlessly. And I wonder about that, because that can always make this Gen Z wood generation, that can make that generation much more aggressive and less empathetic, because the fire boomer generation, it has little or no empathy for other people or other opinions. So this wood generation, I'm pretty excited about it. And then after that is going to be this fire generation again, the new fire generation, the alpha people. They're going to take the change that the wood generation brought in, and they're going to vision what it's going to be, where it could go. So, and then what ends up happening is we'll go into a stabilizing period. A generation after them will help stabilize it if they're allowed to, and then we'll start over again with the metal generation, doing the process and engineering and process improvement. If we look at the fire generation, well, we talked about that with the boomers. If they go out of balance, they could be controlling, manipulative, demanding. They could create the world that's been created. And I think that kind of helps you as a millennial understand why it's so important for you to bring up the best child you can, and that you are absolutely the best generation to be able to do that, because your generation is the generation that's in the element, in the most yin element, in the element that does nurture, that does feed, that does support what the new growth. Okay, so that's Taoism, that's the 5 elements through the generations. I hope you found some of that interesting. I like talking about the theory, so if you found it interesting, give it a like, give me a thumbs up, tell me it was okay, and I'll talk more about Taoism. Okay, until next time, I'll catch you on the other side.